Good morning and welcome to Limitless, the show that brings you love and inspiration on a Saturday morning. And today we have a truly inspiring man. His name is Viv Broughton. He's a music historian, archivist, and an entrepreneur. He's the author of the book titled Too Close to Heaven, The Illustrated History of Gospel Music, which was made into a 3-part channel for TV series. He was marketing director of The Voice newspaper for 14 years and is currently owner and CEO of the Premises Studio in London, a multi-studio complex with a vast client list ranging from Nina Simone and Rihanna through to Michael Kiwanuka and Little Sims, etc., etc., etc. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Viv Broughton on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. Great pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, really good to see you and meet you. I really do admire the work that you've done and what you're still doing, and be really good to find out what makes you limitless. So I think the best place to start is from finding out what your early childhood memories were and how you became a Christian. Please do tell us.
Well, my father was a deacon in the Baptist church, and he also ran the Boys Brigade in the church. And my mother ran the Life Boys, which was the junior equivalent of the Boys Brigade. And so I was brought up I was raised as a Baptist from early childhood and immersed in the work and the life of the church. I didn't really know anything else. So, but as I grew up, I'm a kind of natural rebel, and I kind of rebelled really against the church, I suppose, at the constrictions. You know, as a teenager, I was born just full advantage of the explosion of kind of new music that was happening around the 60s.
Yes.
So I got involved in all of that. And I suppose I kind of, the church and my faith kind of was challenged at that point, so that I seemingly drifted away, but there is a sense where all of this is embedded in you. If you've grown up with it, it's in you somewhere, which is why it is so important that children are brought up in a righteous way, you know, so that whatever happens to them, whatever path they go, that is still there somewhere in them. And when it's required and when it's needed, it kind of comes to the fore and it's available. And God has a way of being there when you need that kind of succor and comfort and support. I'm a great believer in by their works ye shall know them, rather than, you know, I don't go around preaching. I don't kind of believe in that. I think people should know, should come to their own understanding of spiritual matters and the works of God and the power of God in their own way. And so it's something that has always been there for me. But it's been kind of deep and in the background. So I returned to biblical texts and the great wisdoms that are there, particularly in the words of Jesus, and that to me is timeless and extraordinarily perceptive, in that there's nothing, as things change over decades and we are all kind of subjected to new fads and kind of fashions and trends, there is nothing that, when you go particularly to things like the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, that sounds outdated. You know, we often go back into kind of historical things, and you'll find things that people have said in the past. You get a lot of this these days, where people are digging up things that other people have said, maybe decades ago, that are objectionable or don't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
But when you read the words of Jesus in the Bible, there's nothing there that sounds out of place in the present day, you know, and that's almost unheard of, you know. You dig back to people in previous centuries, and you'll find lots and lots of things that they may have said that now sound ridiculous, or they sound objectionable and out of place. So there are great wisdoms, timeless kind of wisdoms in the Christian faith and in the words of Jesus and in the Bible, and that stayed with me all my life.
Yes, that's true. What you say there, as far as Jesus' words being the same yesterday, today, and forever. You know, God
Exactly that
remains the same. And what I find is the words of great men and women that do stand the test of time are often, when you look at it deeply, they're often references from the Bible.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many. I mean, there are simple wisdoms in the Bible, and I'm particularly concentrating on the words of Jesus, because there is obviously lots of stuff in the Bible that is contentious, but that tends to be in regard to the history of the people and the practices of the time and the cultures of the time. But the words of Jesus are timeless, and that's always returned to that, because that's where it all comes from.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it reminds me actually of Lincoln. What did he say? He said, "A house divided cannot stand." But then we see that in Mark, don't we? We see that in the book of Mark, chapter 3, verse 25, where Jesus actually says that himself. You know, these little things that you hear, you go back to the Bible and you see it there. But of course, the Bible is historical as well. You've got numerous different kinds of writings.
Sure.
At the end of the day, it always leads to wisdom, which is the quite remarkable thing about it, that is relevant for different times. And different seasons, and it still brings us back to the same words of wisdom. That's amazing what you said there. Train up the child as he may go, and he will never depart from it. So what age did you come back to the Lord again, or come back into a consciousness?
See, I wouldn't really put it like that. I think it's always kind of been there, embedded in me, and at times, you know, it may have been further away from me than at other times, you know, but it's something that is always, I realize now, has always informed the way I work, the way I live, the way I relate to people. And I think that is the most important thing, that people should know what you are from the way you are, and the way you behave towards them. And you know, the New Testament is it's a handbook really for how to live, and I think that's kind of where it stayed with me.
That's amazing, really amazing. Yeah, when your life is wrapped up in the Word of God, it does shine through. Your light will shine through whether you like it or not, and that's what we're advised to do, isn't it? Let our light shine.
Sure.
Now, yeah, I know when you left school at 17, you became a mechanical engineer, and you took on an apprenticeship at Woolwich Arsenal. Right?
I did, yeah. I actually got expelled from school. Like I said, I'm a born rebel, and I think it was for smoking on sports day. So, I got expelled, and I think my parents were a bit despairing of me at that stage. So, and obviously I wasn't qualified to go to university or anything like that. So I ended up doing this apprenticeship in Woolwich Arsenal, which was a fantastic opportunity to learn some very practical kind of skills, and also just to see another slice of life, you know. But it brought me into, you know, I moved away from home at 17 and was living with the other apprentices in a hostel, and we just, you know, life opened up. You know, I would have been, let's see, around about 18, 19. So, you know, I was born in 1943. So when I was 20, it was 1963. So, which was the perfect moment for all of the explosion of new music, particularly in London at that time, all the new, you know, all the new R&B groups that were exploding out of Britain, and it was the most extraordinarily exciting time, you know. And I got involved in that. I played drums in various bands, and lots of bands were all starting up, and everybody was kind of into the same kind of stuff. So I was a huge fan of early blues and R&B, and so everybody who was in London at that time kind of got involved with each other, and we all gravitated to the same places, you know. So it was, you know, just thinking back to it, it was extraordinary, really, you know, to you know, I met David Bowie when he was, you know, just a young guy, you know, and just starting out, and he's looking for drummers. So yeah, sure, I'll come along and play drums. So end up in a band with David Bowie, and then there's, you know, Alexis Corner, and there's various other people. Peter Frampton I played with, P.P. Arnold, and so it was a very exciting time musically, I think, and also politically, I got very involved in the anti-war movement, pacifist movement at that time, and obviously I'm working in an arms factory. Woolwich Arsenal is an arms factory, so that was a huge conflict of principle, and so I had to fight my way out of the apprenticeship. Back in those days, when you were an apprentice, you were indentured. It was called indentured, which meant that you were contracted for 5 years and you were not allowed to leave. You know, it was not like a job these days. You didn't like the job, you gave it up, and you moved on. You got a job somewhere else. You were not allowed to leave. So I had a huge battle to kind of get out of there, but eventually I did, and then I just went and worked on kind of building sites, and, you know, cleaning jobs and factory jobs, doing the music and being involved in the anti-war movements. Yeah. So it was a very exciting time. You know, it was lots of fascinating things going on. I'm meeting new people all the time, and yeah, I was immersed in that, really.
Yeah, you do what you have to do for what you believe in, and that's admirable in its sense, in itself. Because I know there's a lot of people that stay in situations that they don't want to be in, and that can be an imprisoned sort of state. But when your heart is pulling you in a certain direction for what you believe in, what you know is right, you do what you have to do. And obviously, you know, in the end, playing drums for people like David Bowie and Alexis Corner, etc., 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 you know, it's an achievement, I think. You know, when you think of where these people have gone, and then of course you got involved in gospel music as well for a few gospel bands.
Well, the gospel music thing really came out of my love for kind of early blues and R&B, and there were a few people in London at the time who were kind of fans, I suppose, and collectors of American music. It was all American music at that stage, and a friend of mine started playing. He said, if you like blues, you need to have a listen to this. And he played me some 45s that he'd had imported from America of groups like the Spirit of Memphis and the Swan Silvertones and the Dixie Hummingbirds, I remember, who were these just fabulous vocal groups, gospel groups. And the voices and the harmonies were just so powerful, and I got very kind of hooked on it. I just found it so exciting, and he played me a record from. It was recorded in a church in Detroit, and the pastor of the church was the Reverend C.L. Franklin, and the record that he recorded in his church was in a church service, and it featured his daughter, who was, I think, about 15 at the time, and of course it was Aretha Franklin, and this was before she emerged into secular music, way before that. And this voice singing hymns like "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" and "Precious Memories," and songs like that, and this incredible voice was just hit me like a atom bomb, really. I'd never heard a voice like it at all, and it was I just set me off on a kind of search, really, for the source of this, where this was all coming from. So I wrote to her father, and because you could do that kind of thing in those days, and I sent him whatever it was, $15, and he sent me a copy of that album on vinyl, which I still have, and it's I mean, it's so rare, it's not even listed in the rare record collector's handbook, But so I just followed where the music led, and just got more and more fascinated with the sounds, with the voices, and with the lives of the people who were singing this music. And I thought it was really some of the greatest art that I'd ever heard, the very greatest music I'd ever heard. And there have been, really, for me, no voices to equal gospel music voices. And they articulated faith in a way that I'd never heard it articulated before. Particularly, I mean, Aretha and her father were Baptists, and I was raised, like I said, as a Baptist. So it was an absolute revelation to me that in the Baptist church that I grew up in, was very staid and very formal and very dull, and then suddenly this incredible voice was singing Baptist hymns, so that really drew me into, I mean, things started connected at that point, various things came together, which is how things happen in life, I think, and things that are long buried that just kind of make a connection at some point at the right time in life,
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I like the way you describe it as an art form, because, I mean, goodness gracious, Isaiah 6:3 says the whole world is full of his glory. The whole world is a work of art. And when we think about the fact that the whole world came from sound. He said, let be, let there be, and there was. So, we know that music and sound, the expression of sound, the art, the beauty of it is originated from heaven, from God.
I believe all great art is divinely inspired, and certainly for me, the best of gospel music is as great a religious art form as, say, Handel's Messiah or anything else. It's the equal of that, just for the depth of its of the passion. The expression of faith in such a powerful way, and there is no voices for me that are the equal of the great gospel voices, and I think it's very important as we kind of talk through the whole kind of story of gospel music, which is the most fascinating historical development that I've come across. That we remember that this is and must always be a great art form.
Yeah. That
gets lost to me sometimes. You know, I find people lose sight of that. You know, that they sometimes kind of imagine that gospel music is simply popular music with Christian lyrics. That's not it for me.
I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. Totally agree. It's this beautiful art that we call humanity.
Mm-hmm.
God's tapestry, that God's painting, God's creation,
Mm-hmm.
and all the other art forms, all the other musical art forms are orchestrated. But then gospel music isn't. It's an expression, isn't it? But then you can always tell. I mean, agree. You know, let me know what you think of this. I feel you can always tell when you hear a secular artist that has come from the church. You just can tell because they take that expression, that beauty, that and it's so real, you know, and the passion, and they carry on with that in their creativity within the secular world. And so you can tell that this is different. This is the expression. You can hear God in this, you know.
Absolutely, you can. You know, I mean, I remember when Beyonce first kind of emerged, you know, you just knew she was a church gal. You know, she come from church. But also, you also knew that she was taking her cue from gospel singers. You know, she'd been listening hard.
Yeah.
She'd been listening to Karen Clark of the Clark Sisters. You know, that's where she got her kind of technique from, you know, and she did. I know that she went and listens very, very closely to what Karen Clark was doing and the other Clark sisters. You know, that was a big one for her, and so she was kind of taking that and utilizing it in her act, you know. And yeah, of course you can hear it. You could hear it in like Sam Cooke, for instance. You knew that Sam Cooke came from church, which he obviously did. He was lead singer of the Soul Stirrers gospel group, and took all of that. And you know, even if you look at something like all the Motown hits, you know, the Temptations and the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles and things like that, Gladys Knight and the Pips, it's all modelled on gospel groups and gospel phrasing and expression and digging deep into, you know, deep into your soul and getting the best out of it, you know.
Yeah, you hear the God element. The
you do, but there's always seems to be something missing. There is a kind of it's kind of diluted. So it's got the sound, it's got some of the technique, but it doesn't have the free-flowing connection really to the source, to the inspiration that comes from God, you know, because that's not acceptable in secular music. In pop music, you know, the whole industry doesn't like that kind of thing, and to be fair, it probably doesn't sell very well either, you know. So you can see why they might not want all of that in secular music industry. But that's why I would always want to go back to the source, go back to the real thing, you know. Even though I might like, you know, a Beyonce track or a kind of Sam Cooke track, you know, I'd want to go back and hear the real thing, you know. And that's what I think people should do. You hear something that moves you, go back, start digging, see where they got their inspiration from. And that's always been the interesting thing for me.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is church is free.
Church is free to get in.
Yes.
You could put it that way.
And you get that thing which is called the spiritual experience as well, you know, and you get the real thing, you know, you get the pure, undiluted, spiritual experience in church.
Sure. Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Go on.
Yeah, you wrote this book, and Too Close to Heaven: The Illustrated History of Gospel Music, which of course was picked up by Channel 4, and they made a whole series on it. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about that, and maybe talk about, maybe you've got some pictures as well, so we'll go through those pictures and
Mm-hmm.
through the journey of gospel music. But I sincerely believe that when we study music, if anybody wants to study music, research music in any historical form or analytical form, really you need to go back to where music started, which it did start in heaven. It is through the gospel experience that you really do get the history of music, organized sound, art, a sound in art form, like I said before, from the creation of time. And you even see the adversary, that it was the angel of music as well. So you can see that music is very much a Christian thing. So let's talk about your book and talk about the earliest gospel musicians, and we look at the spirituality and what really moved them. Thank you.
Well, like a lot of history, you can carry on searching backwards through time. So we could follow gospel music history back for 300 years, which might seem extraordinary to people who are just starting out in gospel music at the moment. But I picked a couple of kind of points where gospel music obviously began in America. It began in the slave plantations of the South mostly, and that's a story that has been told many times. So we don't need to kind of go into that too deeply. I think most people are familiar with that kind of story. But obviously you can go back further than that. You can go back to the origins of the music when which came from two strands, and one would have been from West Africa, the kind of religious and cultural music and chants and dances and rituals that would have come with the people who've been transported to America. But then the hymns that came from Britain, the nonconformist hymns of John Wesley and Isaac Watts, would have impacted on when they were heard by slaves in America, took them and fused them with their own culture. And what emerged were the spirituals. So I think that's the first kind of thing that both begins the story proper,
Yes,
but also has that connection with Britain, because those hymns came from here. The kind of rhythms and culture and phrasing would have come from West Africa. So there are those two kind of roots of gospel music, and one of them came from Britain. But it came back to Britain in 1873. A group of freed slaves came to London from Nashville, from Tennessee, and they were a singing group, and they arrived in London. They were invited by the abolitionist movement to come, and they came to sing their songs, and they became a sensation in Victorian England, to the extent that it's hard to imagine the impact that they had on Victorian society in Britain. They were the sensation of the day, the musical and artistic sensation. And they sang everywhere. They sang for the Prime Minister Gladstone, and Queen Victoria invited them to sing for her. And she was so moved to tears, in fact.
Mm.
So she commissioned this portrait, which I think you've got a copy of there. You can show, which was commissioned by Queen Victoria and was painted by the court painter of the time.
Mm.
And it shows the group of singers, and it's a remarkable portrait. It's actually not a particularly good painting, I've got to say, but it is a huge portrait that it's hanging today in the forecourt of Fisk University in Nashville, outside of Nashville, which I visited. So, and this portrait is probably something like 30 feet wide. I mean, it's a huge, huge portrait.
Mm.
And the singers raised funds touring in Britain. They sang all over the country, and particularly in places like in Manchester, for instance. There's a poster of I have in my collection of their concert in Manchester, but they played in the cities all over.
Mm.
All over the country, in small towns, in big towns, in cities, in concert halls, in churches, but they also kind of sang in hospitals. And but there were queues. I mean, thousands and thousands of people came out to see them in this country, and they literally were the sensation of the day. And they came kind of 4 or 5 times, and they raised funds to build this this university that's still there today. There's an image I think you can show of Jubilee Hall, which is the centerpiece. There's the poster for the concert in Manchester. That would have been, I think, in 1874. That one, and so they raised money. You know, they collected money and they sent the money back to Nashville to build a university. Which they did. And there's an engraving that appeared in the Illustrated London News, showing, obviously this was before the time of photography, so there is an engraving which I think is you have there is an image number 3, and that's most beautiful. I mean, it looks a bit like St Pancras Station, this massive building that was built using the funds that they collected in England. So England took the Fisk Jubilee Singers to their heart, and their songs were embedded in the culture of this country. I mean, I grew up hearing some of their songs without knowing what they were. Songs like Steal Away and Go Down Moses. And, you know, rugby crowds sing Swing Low Sweet Chariot. You know, that's the big rugby song. You know, that came from the Fisk Jubilee Singers. I've known that song all my life. Most people have, you know, but it's because that song came from the Fisk Jubilee Singers in Britain. And so I think that's a remarkable kind of, it's almost like some of this music has gone to America, has been reformed and taken by the people who were singing it, and they brought it back to Britain, and we kind of benefit from some of that today. So yeah, that, I think, was a very interesting moment.
Now, I know the gramophone was invented in 1877. I mean, it would have been wonderful to have had recordings of that. You know, that would be like, what, 4 years later, the gramophone, from the time they were singing.
Yes, yeah.
How long did they last, as you know, on the scene?
Well, there were various, because of the huge success of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, which if you read their personal stories, it was a grueling. I mean, you can imagine just simply going from Nashville to London. There are no planes, so they had to travel by boat, you know, and they did it 5 times, and a lot of them got sick, and it was a hard struggle. But they stayed together. But then new people kind of joined the group. Others left. The group kept going for quite a long time. Several decades, and they did record as soon as recording techniques were perfected, and you can hear early recordings of the Fifth Jubilee Singers. I have to say it is very formalized and it's kind of westernized. It's kind of I don't imagine, I mean, obviously we don't know for sure, but I don't imagine this is how they were originally sung. I think they were kind of toned down a bit for Western audiences, and they were kind of made for the concert hall. So one has to sort of imagine how the real thing might have sounded, you know. But there are records of the Fifth Jubilee Singers. You can listen to that. And obviously the birth of recorded music had a profound effect on the development of gospel music. And I think we can probably, I mean, it's a huge history, so we can't go into every detail, but, you know, we jump forward maybe to, you know, around about 1932, for instance, the 1930s, when the Great Depression hit America. This gave impetus to and kicked off really what we call the golden age of gospel music, which ran through the 1930s, 40s, and into the 1950s. So in 1932, you had Thomas A. Dorsey, who is called the father of gospel music. Now, he was a blues singer. He was a bit like he scandalized the church, really. He was almost like he was a figure like Prince in his day. And if you can imagine someone like Prince converting to Christianity and becoming a pastor, that was the kind of the impact that Dorsey had. And he was pastor of a church in Chicago, Ebenezer Baptist Church, Baptist again. So, you know, I'm thinking, yes, okay, there's the Baptist for you. Good. And at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he was joined, one of the people who joined his church was a woman singer from New Orleans who had a deep kind of blues voice, and it was Mahalia Jackson. So Thomas A. Dorsey wrote songs for Mahalia Jackson. That's Mahalia there with actually with Studs Terkel, who was a TV host. Mahalia Jackson was probably the greatest gospel singer of her era, and someone who internationalized the music. She was like an ambassador, really. She became popular the world over. But they were in Chicago, and so they birthed this kind of new music that up to then had been called spirituals, but now was called gospel music. And that's when gospel music, more or less as we know it, really began in Chicago around that time. And it just sparked a whole movement of hundreds and thousands of singers and groups, and eventually choirs. So that's really where some of the best of gospel music was recorded and made.
Yes. Okay. I mean, my goodness. So you can really see how you get snippets of people from the church, you know, sort of found people that start a movement, and then you have others that, you know, I'm sure in between that there would have been many others that then followed suit. And then you have another, you know, you've got the Frisk Singers, and then you've got Mahalia Jackson. And, you know, do you think that people at the time did not know how to how to sort of identify or to categorize gospel music. Do you think there was a problem with that, perhaps?
Well, I think the problem, the pastors had the problem with what was going on. It was, as so often happens, the pastors are protective of their flock, or see themselves as protectors of their flock, and they were a little uncomfortable with this kind of rocking, upbeat, exciting new music that was sweeping through the churches, and obviously the young people were getting involved in it. So not everybody was in favour, particularly as it was seen to be led by someone like Thomas A. Dorsey, who had been a blues singer, famous blues singer, with quite risque kind of songs and had huge hits with them, and who was now spearheading this new music called gospel. And so there was a certain amount of resistance, but the music was carried by just the power and the passion of the artists and the performers, particularly like the groups, the groups like the Ward Singers and the quartets, the Dixie Hummingbirds, and this is where I first heard the music, the Spirit of Memphis, Swan Silvertones, groups like that, and then the female groups like the Gospel Harmonettes, people who, groups like, if you go back and listen to this music now, you'll be absolutely stunned by the power of their voices, and this was the effect it had in the churches of America, that the music just swept through the church, and it was like a revival, really. It was like a kind of revival movement, I suppose you would describe it like that. An upsurge in faith through music.
Yes.
An expression of faith through music. And so it was a very exciting time. A huge amount of it was recorded. You're talking tens of thousands of groups, and some of the greatest voices of all time came through that. This is the era when Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers, for instance, this was their era. They were part of that era. And it's around that time that people took gospel music and secularized it and turned it into pop music. And that eventually led on to developments like Motown, which are clearly based on the format and the singing style of gospel music, but obviously with secular lyrics.
Yeah, and there was obviously, as you said, pastors have claiming ownership and trying to keep that purity as such. I personally think that the ownership should have spurred leaders to push it forward.
You would think so, but it often happens that the pastors see new developments as a threat rather than opportunity. And you had it in this country, actually. We're jumping forward a bit now, but when the London Community Gospel Choir first assembled, and the Reverend Basil Mead pulled together the first group of singers for the London Community Gospel Choir, it was a very ecumenical choir, the first of those ecumenical choirs, where singers were coming from every kind of church, not from one church, So they were from Kojic, they were from New Testament, they were from Church of God of Prophecy, and so on and so on. And I remember very clearly that the pastors at the time were deeply unhappy, and lots of them actually forbade their singers from going to sing with the London Community Gospel Choir. They saw it as a threat to their own domain rather than an opportunity to take the word of God in song out to the world. So it's something that's happened over the years, you know, over the decades, and is sort of understandable. But this is how movements forward happen. You know, it breaks through to something new, and obviously those who are there will be people who want to protect what has already been, you know, what is, and don't and are uncomfortable with the new things that are coming through.
And when you don't have a template, you don't have a reference, you don't know, that can cause fear or doubt or, you know, insecurities with that. Whereas now we do have proven, you know, we have evidence that this is an evangelical tool. It does bring people into the church, and it helps them to understand that actually there is the way, the truth, and the life as such. But I think that I would probably see that a lot of these great singers would have gone to secular because they found acceptance there. And then, you know, with that, they would then come away from the church slowly because, you know, you can't serve two masters as such. So tell us about Sister Rosetta.
Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Now, she was very interesting, and I really kind of picked a few people who have had an influence both in gospel music in America, but also in this country. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe was one of the great voices of gospel, but also a fabulous, very rocky guitarist, very bluesy guitarist. And she came and toured Britain many times, and she in the I would say this is in the late 1950s in Britain. She was very popular here. So she brought her own kind of style of very happy, rocking kind of gospel music. Many big hits, This Train is Bound for Glory, those kind of songs. And Didn't It Rain is another song that people might be familiar with. So she came and was very popular. I mean, obviously this was for English audiences by and large, you know, who would be coming to hear this music. And it was popular in this country. Yeah. But it wasn't really until the end of the 1950s and into the 60s that migrants came from West Indies and largely and settled in England and brought their own music with them. But also some of that would have come via America first into the Caribbean, and then the songs. So the gospel music arrived in Britain in two different ways. One was the straight kind of, as Sister Rosetta and Mahalia Jackson sang in London several times, was hugely popular here. So you had these two influences that came into Britain. One would be the kind of imported from America, the music imported from America, but then also the music that came with the people, as people came on the Windrush and later kind of migrants who came and settled here, brought their own songs and their hymns. You know, brought the Redemption hymnal with them, and that brought in a different kind of musical influence as well. Obviously, the music from the Caribbean kind of was blended with, I mean, lots of people arrived with their records that they'd got from America and brought with them. So, and choirs then began in the black churches in Britain. I think the first of these would have been in Wolverhampton. Oliver Lysate came from Jamaica and settled and started the New Testament Church of God in Wolverhampton with a choir. And I think that was probably the first homegrown, if you want to say homegrown, gospel choir would have been in Wolverhampton at his church. But then very quickly, Church of God in Christ in London, in various parts of the country, they developed their own choirs, and people came from America to teach these choirs. So Mattie Moss Clark, Mother Mattie Moss Clark, who is the mother of the Clark sisters, she was the international minister of music for the Church of God in Christ. And she came many, many times over to train the singers in Kojic, particularly in London, but also other parts of the country. So lots and lots of the singers who today are well known in gospel music in this country were trained by Mattie Moss Clark. So the choirs were very, very important.
Yes, most definitely. Okay, so we have picture number 7.
Which is this is P.P. Arnold, who was she came over with the Ike and Tina Turner review as a backing singer. She remained here, but she was a gospel singer in America, who had a career then in secular music, but never really. She was deep in her heart, she was a gospel singer, and this was in 1968, and that's actually, it was a memorial to Martin Luther King, who had just been assassinated a couple of months before. And this is an event that I organised on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral as a memorial to Martin Luther King, and that's actually me there smoking a cigarette. It's a good example, really, of how singers came from America and influenced and settled here, and P.P. Arnold has had a very successful career here. So there was P.P. Arnold, someone I'm still in touch with now, and she's had a huge influence. And we actually started to put a gospel group together in this country with her singing, and didn't really do very much at the time, but it's an interesting historic photo that I only found a couple of years ago. I didn't know it existed, but that was a great event for Martin Luther King.
Amazing. And of course, the next picture has got, I noticed, Misha Paris in it. I've never seen this picture before. I didn't know that this was her past.
Yeah. I was very involved in the gospel music scene in the UK around this time, which would have been in the early 1980s. And I went to New Testament Church of God in Lee Green near Lewisham in South London. It was a concert on a Saturday night. Lots of groups were there. There was the electricity failed, I remember. So this group was singing and the electricity failed. So they had to sing a cappella in the dark. And I could hear this voice. And this amazing voice was just carried out right across. Didn't need any amplification, didn't need microphones or a PA. And I thought, I got to find this voice. Who was that? Who was that? Amazing voice. So after the concert, I kind of tracked them down, and then I started to work with them, and they were a very successful gospel group at the time. I took them and put them on at the Royal Albert Hall. We took them to Italy. They did lots and lots of concerts. And Misha was very young at the time, and she was very ambitious and wanted to be a
Hello.
back a little bit, because for a few reasons I thought she'd be a great loss to gospel music, but also she was very young. I just knew she would be very hard for her, but in the end I carried on working with her, and got her a record deal with Island Records, and her first album went platinum, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yes,
But they were typical. They were typical of a whole raft of groups that were emerging around that time in Britain, like the Trumpets of Zion, the Doyley Brothers, the Escoffery Sisters, who were all making great music. It was a very productive time. So yeah, it was good, and Spirit of Watts were one of those at the forefront of that movement in Britain.
Most definitely, and there we go, another example of a singer that has moved into the secular world. I'm talking about Misha Paris, and I'm sure also her
Yes,
that came from church, and you can just tell with the
absolutely you can tell. Yeah, sure.
Quality of her voice. So the next picture, Reverend James Cleveland.
Right. Well, I spoke a bit about Mother Mattie Moss Clark coming to train some of the choirs in Britain. Now, Reverend James Cleveland was another Baptist, I have to say, and he had the most profound influence on choirs in America. He founded the Gospel Music Workshop of America, and the community choirs that he founded and trained are still going today. And he came over and performed at the Royal Albert Hall with the London Community Gospel Choir, and that was a big moment. It was a big moment for me just to meet him, because he was such an influential figure in the history of gospel music. And so that was a big and important moment when he came. It was almost like an endorsement. He was known at the time as the king of gospel music, and obviously he's passed on now, but that was when kind of American gospel music met British gospel music.
Yes. And of course, he would have brought so much that, because you hear the music from the London Community Gospel Choir, and they are quality. Their music is quality.
Absolutely, they are, yeah. And they've nurtured so many singers. So many singers have come through the ranks of the London Community Gospel Choir and other choirs, and have gone on to, great things today.
Yes, most definitely. Tell us, please, about Levine Hudson.
Levine Hudson was one of the singers that came up through the London Community Gospel Choir, and I have to say was probably the greatest voice that has emerged in British gospel music. She was somebody I worked with quite closely for a number of years. She was signed to a big recording contract with Virgin Records, and they put a lot of their kind of marketing and development resources behind her. She was Church of God in Christ, daughter of a Kojic minister in South London. And I would have said that she's probably the greatest voice that's been produced in this country. Sadly, she did not have great health, and a few years ago she sadly died. But if you dig back and find some of her recordings, you'll have some idea of what a voice she had. An extraordinary singer, beautiful voice. So sadly missed.
Beautiful voice, absolutely beautiful voice. And of course, you know, you have been in a privileged position to have met and to be a part of this scene. It has developed as it's become what it is today. Now, what do you think that we can do as Christians that we to bring unity, you know, among musicians within the churches? And because I really feel that there is a time for that where gospel musicians can come into unity. We can come and together, because that's where we build the strength. That's where you find more grace, you know, in unity. And you know, it's been such an honor to have you on the show and to speak with such first-hand knowledge and experience of all that's gone on. And we've got to give honor where honor is due. You really have been a great asset to the community. And I truly believe that with all that you've acquired, the knowledge and the skill and the experience, I believe God has brought you to a time like this to really impact His work. So what do you feel that we need to do as we move forward and we take this thing forward, and so that we can really follow out the will and plan and purpose of God?
Sorry, I lost you. I missed that question. Is it possible to repeat that?
I wanted to know, what do you think that we as a Christian community need to do in order, number one, to bring unity, and also to carry out the will and purpose of God among Christians, especially within the gospel arena?
Well, you might find this surprising, but I don't think the unity thing is that important, to be honest. I think it will. There is a flow to the creative process, and it is a creative process because it is divinely inspired, that it almost flows like water in lots of different directions. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, that people follow where they are led, and create to the best of their ability. I think the much more important thing is that people who are creating gospel music today kind of go back to the basics, and the basics are that it is an art form, and they should strive to create the greatest possible art that they can do. But also, it's a form of music. It's a style of music. You know, it's just as much has its own formula and own format as country music or jazz or blues or classical music even, you know. When you hear a piece of gospel music, even if you just hear a tiny snippet on the radio or wherever you might hear it, you know, that's gospel music. You know, it's not, and I think this is where a lot of people go get it wrong. It's not any kind of music with Christian lyrics. You know, some of the rap stuff that I hear that's kind of like rap music with Christian lyrics. To me, that's something different. You know, that's not what I would call gospel music. I mean, there are two ways of looking at this. You can either look at it just as an evangelical vehicle, a way of preaching to people, and in which case then that's fine. But I wouldn't call that gospel music necessarily. You know, it may be, but it may not be. I think it's to go back to the roots of the music and reinvent it for yourself in your own way. But it's a style of singing, you know, it's a style of harmonizing. And there is something authentic about the sound itself. And I think it's important to for anybody who is going to be a gospel artist, in whether in this country, anywhere in the world, is that you dig back into those who've gone before, you know, to go back and listen to the great gospel artists of the last couple of 100 years, not to copy them, but to understand what they were doing, how great they were, and how great your own contribution could be in the light of that.
Most definitely. I define, I mean, defining gospel music itself, just a definition of gospel music can be varied and for some difficult. I would say that it's a dance between human sound, because of course we're made in the image of God, so we are creators. And so anybody out there who says I don't have a voice, even your mere expression is a voice in itself. It's a voice. But what makes it beautiful and takes it to the next level is when the Spirit gets involved. So therefore, as you express, you then see the entrance of the Holy Spirit, and there is this beautiful serenade where you're ministering to him, but he's ministering to you, and everybody who hears it gets to experience the impacts, the power. What is your definition of gospel music?
Well, I would say gospel music, and Thomas A. Dorsey always repeated this: gospel. What is gospel? Gospel is good news in bad times, and we live in bad times, and so it's good news in bad times. As music, it's an art form in and of itself, and it's divinely inspired, so that the best of the music is the combination of a natural great singing voice with the inspiration that comes from the faith, from God, and it's really God speaking through a great voice. So what you bring to it is your own talent and your own training, but that is allied to, and it's harnessed to the Word of God. And I think when those two things come together, that's when you get great gospel music.
Wow, this is educational for all those out there that are aspiring gospel musicians. And in that answer, I see the need for excellence, for training, for practice, for developing your voice. And when we take things seriously, we put in the work, so that the art form becomes that much more excellence in whatever unique form that it is its foundation. You perfect your craft.
You definitely do, and you absolutely must. It is an art form, but it's also a craft, and you have to work at it. I mean, the great cellist Pablo Casals was asked why he still practiced when he was 87 years old. He practiced every day, and he replied, "Because I think I'm getting better."
Yes.
And that's it. Lots of people don't want to put the work in. You've got to put the work in. You've got to do the practice and the training, and carry on striving to greater heights. Always, you never fulfill your complete potential. There is always something left.
There's a pattern in the chronological discussion that we had with regard to the gospel music scene historically, where you would see these great singers would come over and they'll pour into, meaning spiritual pouring, as not so much as a mentor as such, but as the whole thing of follow me as I follow Christ as such, and they poured into, i.e. The Long Community Gospel Choir. You had the Reverend there that was actually coming over, Reverend James Cleveland,
yeah,
and so on and so forth. Do you think that could be moving forward? Some of the great singers, that is what we need now, perhaps for the up and coming, the new ones, that perhaps they need some kind of guidance, mentoring, or discipling from those who have established, not necessarily in the popular culture as such, becoming popular, but who have established themselves on the scene, and like P.P. Arnold, who in her own right is quality, to be able to pour into the younger and the newer upcoming generation. How do you think that would impact the movement?
I think it's incredibly important, particularly when people like Matty Moss Clark came over and worked with the Kojic Choir, for instance, in London. I mean, she was such a powerhouse of inspiration, but also she was tough. She really, nobody got away with anything at all. She'd throw a shoe at you if you were singing, if you weren't giving 100%. She'd literally take her shoe off and throw it at you. And she was one tough cookie, she didn't mess. And yeah, these, I particularly think of the musicians in the Kojic Choir, people like Nicky Brown and who were there at the time, and they were quite terrified of her, but they remember everything, every word she told them, and they learnt from her. They learnt from people like the daughter of Twinkie Clark, it's one of the greatest hammered organ players in the world in any style of music, one of the great composers of gospel music, who is almost unheard of at the moment, these days, but learn from the pioneers, from the giants of this music, and they are giants. These are legendary people, and they are legendary voices, and they need to be heard. They need to be listened to. And then, they're not given enough regard and respect for what they've done and what they're still doing.
Yeah. And I did say this last week with one of my guests. He who honors a prophet gets a prophet reward, and of course, he who honors a righteous man or righteous woman gets the righteous man and woman's reward. So as we pay respect to those who have been before, and as we sit, Mary sat at the foot of Jesus, we sit down and we receive the Jesus in them. We receive the Spirit. We receive the knowledge and wisdom that they've acquired throughout the years. It helps the newer musicians. It helps and encourages them. I mean, God knows they need encouraging. They need encouraging because, you're finding that we're living in a time where there are so many musicians who are going to the secular world because they're not being accepted in the church, perhaps. And that's been going on for years. And we've clearly identified the differences when we hear them. We hear the true quality and the true talent and the true Christ in them. But then they're singing. And I think there's a lot of them that perhaps would love to sing gospel music, would love to come back, but there's no way back. Whereas in your case, you knew, when you were working as an apprenticeship for Woolwich Arsenal, and you knew that, hey, this is not, but you hadn't gone too far into anything, or maybe you had, I don't know, but you fought to get yourself out. Now, we've spoken about people like Beyonce. We've spoken about numerous other well-known artists. It probably would be difficult if an artist who was so far and successful in the secular world to come out of that. How do you think we can help and to give, so there's a door available for those artists out there who have gone into the secular world? Because I know that the Promises Studio, you host many people in the secular world. You are literally you are providing a fantastic service to many well-known musicians. How do you think we can do that to bring them back or give them that open door and show them that there is another way that can also be that actually will be of greater benefit than the path that they're going now?
Well, gospel music is a ministry, and you have to approach it like that, and it's not for everyone. It's a vocation. You are called to be a minister or not. Not everyone is called to be a minister, and it's I think if you're called and that is your vocation, and you're inspired by God to do that, then there will always be a way. I mean, Reverend Al Green, one of the great soul singers, of all time, left secular music, and is now the Reverend Al Green at a church in Memphis, you know. And although he still comes, he will still sing secular music. He is a minister of a church, you know, and believes that that is his vocation. I think there is always a way, if you are called to be that kind of minister, then you can do that, but it's not for everyone, you know. I think the parallel would be somebody who is maybe a very skilled bricklayer, for instance, or a builder. Then you might be called only to build churches. But if you just build a house, but you put all of your heart and soul into building a great house that is not cheap and nasty and has flaws in it and is going to fall down, you're still doing the work of God.
Yes, that's very true. But you know, there's some people who are called, and those are the ones I mean. You know, they are called, and as they come into Christ and as they come into the born again experience, and they grow and develop, and they're discipled, and they understand who they are, as it says in 1 Peter 2:9, we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, to show forth the praises to him who has called you out of darkness into marvelous light. For those ones, which many people become that as they grow, but they're still in the secular world, but secretly or privately, they've come to understand that they are a city on a hill, and they are salt of the earth, and they desperately have something within them, rivers of living water that wants to shine, but there is no way that they see how they can come. You know, like you spoke about the Reverend. What was it you said that was a prince in his time?
Thomas A. Dorsey, yeah, sure.
Thomas Dorsey. And you know, you spoke about him, and that nowadays you find that many don't even feel they're going to be accepted. You know, I've heard somebody that's actually said to me, "Do you know what I've done? Do you know how far I've gone? Oh, they wouldn't accept me in the church. There's no way." I mean, that's spoken like a person that knows something is missing, and they want to scream something. They want to, you know, but they can't, or they think they can't.
The door is always there, open, you know, the door is always there. And I think if people want to make that kind of change in their life, there are ways for them to do that. I mean, some churches might reject them, but a lot of churches won't, you know. A lot of churches will accept anybody through the door, and as they should, you know. It's not the church is not an exclusive club. The door should always be open to anybody who needs to walk through the door, you know. So I don't see, I mean, I can see that some artists might have problems with that, and I can, you know, think of a few who might feel awkward or uncomfortable or find it difficult because of where they stand or what the kind of shows or the kind of records that they've made, you know. But there are, I think it will come back to whether they are truly called to be, particularly if we're talking about them giving up secular music and becoming gospel singers, which is obviously a huge step. And I think only somebody who is called to be a minister would be, I mean, great gospel singers are prophets, you know. They're prophets and ministers. That's what they're called to do. And that is a special calling, you know. Others can live quite quietly and live their faith in their daily life, in their relationships with other people, in the way they act, which brings me back to by their works ye shall know them. You know, the way you live and the way you behave with other people, how you look after other people, is just as much an expression of Christian faith as standing up on a stage and singing about it.
Interesting.
In my opinion.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really ran out of time now, but I know I wanted to speak about, there were so many things that we could have said. The fact that you built Europe's first fully professional solar powered recording studio. And of course, you know, you also a co-chair of Tomorrow Warriors Trust, the UK's most successful jazz educational organization founded by Gary Crosby, OBE, and you know, just some of the other things that you're doing. But we ran out of time. It's one of those things where we have to invite you back again in the future, and would love to know that you will be able to do that.
It's a huge pleasure. Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. And until the next time, God bless you. Okay, so it's been an experience today, and we really have learned. And I just pray that you're able to go back to some of the names that was mentioned and look them up, listen to their music, and learn and perfect your craft and your skill, and so that you can allow that vessel that you're creating as a gospel musician and even a gospel music listener, that you can find a way that God can perfect you, perfect your walk, and perfect the experience that you are receiving from him, and in the light of his glory, in the mighty name of Jesus. And of course, I'm Reverend Maria Bond, and you've been watching Limitless on LCBN TV. We look forward to some more Limitless next week, same time and same place. And until then, goodbye.